Minister, thank you for hosting us here at your office.
As usual, it's always important that you come and visit us at Kwacha House. You're welcome.
Thank you. Let's start first of all with talking about the budget and economic contribution of tourism. In 2024, we have seen reports that the economy was resilient. You know, this is 3.8%, and this is despite this severe drought that was experienced in the 2023-2024 season. Growth is now projected for 2025 at around 5%, and this is due to an increased mining activity. And this is recovery also of the agriculture sector and strong performance in the ICT sector. Where is tourism falling in all of this with regards contributing to the economic growth of the country?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and also to just really appreciate that you found time to come to the Minister of Tourism to just do a deep dive on what the 2026 budget has in store for us. So I'll just take you back a couple of years ago when we were talking about what the 2025 budget was going to look like. And obviously it was last year around about this time. And I'll make mention that our contribution, rather, our expenditure for the 2025 budget was sitting at about 770 million kwacha, which obviously within that particular period, we saw that among the many sectors that we saw a bit of rebound, saw a bit of resilience, was that of tourism and that of ICT. Now, this is against the background of having gone through the most dreaded drought that we ever experienced in our country. In that particular period, I must indicate to you that as a sector itself, we did contribute close to 2.9% to GDP. And obviously, that's how the economy grew to about 3.9, close to 4%, which obviously was pretty much good. Now, in terms of where we are as a sector, the tourism sector is one sector which I'd like to regard as a green sector. We've always rallied behind our big brothers mining, our big brothers agriculture, and obviously in this day and age we're talking about energy plus manufacturing. But what we've actually seen is that the tourism sector is one such sector that is able to actually be more resilient as opposed to these other sectors. Why am I saying so? Is because first of all, we saw how resilient we were during the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite going through difficult periods, we were able to remain resilient. I mean, I will probably give it up to our locals. They kept the pulse on the business. We would have flatlined easily, but we managed to actually get out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, we went through cholera as well, and then now the drought itself. Now, with respect to what opportunities that exist within the tourism sector and how they can contribute to our positioning of 5.9% GDP growth, we are always talking about the opportunities that tourism has in terms of job creation. I want to just indicate to you, Jonah, that the tourism sector arguably employs a lot of people. 9 out of 10 jobs which are recruited on a daily basis world over is that in the hospitality sector. Now, that in itself gives you an indication of what we could possibly do. We're talking about investment aspects. The investment in the tourism sector is one such that a lot of people may not have paid attention to, especially our locals in Zambia. Most of the investment that you see in the tourism sector today is probably influenced by foreign direct investment. But that shouldn't be the case. In as much as we love foreign direct investment, but we think we need ownership as the locals to invest in this particular sector. Why am I calling upon the locals to invest in the sector? Is because the cake is big enough. The cake is big enough to accommodate as many people as they possibly can. Hospitality in Zambia is in our blood. Even just the normal way you are received in any home in Zambia today, you'd actually realize that that is hospitality. But we need to take it a notch higher. Take it a notch higher in terms of monetizing it, as opposed to what we see where we are always just wanting to be, quote unquote, the consumers of the service. But I think it's about time where we now become the producers of the service. We need to create value. We need to monetize that which was God-given resources that we have, even just the normal well-being of who we are as Zambians. Zambians are known to be hospitable by nature, and I can safely tell you that if you're hospitable by nature, it therefore requires you to monetize that value that you have.
Is there enough support infrastructure, support policies that can encourage these locals to invest? Because the idea behind the investment is that people must make a return on their money.
Absolutely. And I like the way you put it. You're talking about supporting infrastructure and supporting policy. So what we've done in the last 4 years, John, I will just indicate to you that We have had support from various partners, NGOs, partners in government, partners in development, who have actually done a deep dive on having to understand the policy framework that governs the tourism sector. And I want to just publicly state that the sector itself is one such sector that is heavily taxed and heavily regulated. And we identified that as a ministry. And the first order of business that we did, obviously when we got into office, was to now look critically at some of these pieces of legislation that govern tourism. One such piece of legislation was the Zambia Hospitality Act. Another one was that of the Wildlife Act, and many others, Museum Act, Heritage Act, which in my honest opinion were a cake. A cake in the sense that some of them were promulgated as far back as 1977. I mean, what kind of progress are you going to have if you're going to use an act of such, an old act rather? So we have gotten into a process where now we are looking at repealing and in some cases amending some of these acts. That in itself is going to now open up opportunities. So even the aspects of investment, some of the investment was blocked because the act, or rather legislation, or rather the bills themselves were not able to allow investment to come into the country. Now we're slowly looking at how ways and means on how we could actually create more value in terms of investment. And that is the more reason why I will indicate to you that within Cabinet, we approved the new Public-Private Partnership Act, which now becomes much, much easier for us to convert some of these deals that our government is working on, such as the Ndola-Lusaka dual carriageway. If we had not taken bold steps to amend the PPP Act, we wouldn't have seen what is happening currently at the moment. And many other PPPs that we've actually instituted, which obviously are a long list, which will take us a lot of time to start actualizing or speaking about it rather. And then also the issues of infrastructure, John. You know, we've actually gotten to a point where, as government, we've realized that if you're going to create investment in these public spaces that we have. I'll give an example. Let's say the Northern Circuit in Lumangwe falls there. The only way I could entice any investor to go there is if that investor has access to that place. So what we've actually done as government is to create what we'd like to call minimal infrastructure development. Minimal infrastructure development simply means that we want to take road network there, we want to take power there, also want to take water. Now, those are some of the key ingredients that need to be in one particular area to allow any possible investor to come and invest in that particular place. So if I'm going to tell you to go and invest in Lumangwe today, you could possibly tell me to say, look, Minister, it's going to be very expensive for me because I'll need to grade the road, I'll need to pull kilometers of power, I also need to create a water treatment plant for that particular area to be able to survive. But that, again, is the mandate of government. And that is exactly what we've deliberately done. So along the way, and remember also, most of these issues that we're talking about, these are not just motherhood statements which are being made by politicians such as myself, but it's a process that is actually ongoing. Some of these issues that I'm talking about are already being implemented. I'll give an example of what is happening in Kasaba Bay. We were talking about creating an airport there. An airport is almost being constructed there. Feasibility study is done. The next step is now to get the contractor on site. We're talking about grading of the Sumbu Road, 75 kilometers to open up the Kasaba Bay area, Sumbu National Park. Contract almost done. Now, those are some of the mitigating issues that we're working on to ensure that investment now becomes ready for you, the private sector. I also want to just make mention that as government, this government of Hakainde Hichilema, the UPND, is pro-private sector. When I say pro-private sector, we create an enabling environment for the private sector to come on board, and then they be able to now pay the taxes, they be able to employ our boys and girls, and also create value. And that in itself is what grows an economy.
With relation to macroeconomic objectives, government says that it intends to increase domestic revenue to at least 22.3% of the GDP. How do you see tourism contributing to this objective that government has set?
And I just want to indicate to you that over 80% 80% funding of this year's budget, next year's budget rather, being generated domestically is something that we're very delighted about. And ultimately, along the way, if our plans actually get to be what they want to be, we'll be able to be happy that 100% of our nation's budget will be generated or will be funded domestically. Now, you agree with me that some of the economic sectors that we have today, agriculture, mining, tourism, energy, manufacturing, obviously the likes of ICT, these are what we're going to call the drivers of our economy. Now, these are the ones who are going to support the social sector. So if you're going to talk about us as tourism to generate these funds, currently the budget has the proposal for us as tourism is sitting at about 1.5 billion in the 2026 budget. And the discussion that we're already having within the ministry is, if we're going to spend 1.5 billion as a ministry, what should we now put to Treasury with regards to the amount of revenue that we're going to generate? Now, for us, it's very simple. Tourism is nature-based in Zambia. And when I say nature-based, we're talking about wildlife, water, forests. And that is the key ingredient for any tourist to come into our country. Now, guess what? Surprise, surprise. So in that 1.5 billion that we're talking about, there's what they call wildlife conservation, wildlife law enforcement, and obviously tourism marketing. That in itself is something that we are going to sit back and say, look, how much should we contribute to this particular GDP? We're very delighted today that almost immediately we have signed partnerships, which I'd like to call collaborative management partnerships, into managing one of our biggest natural resources, which is the Kafue National Park, over a period of 20 years. We have also about to sign up a renewal, rather, of another collaborative management partnership with Flourished National Park, Bangweulu Wetlands. We're almost into discussions with Lavushimanda National Park. Now, these are what I would like to call pristine national parks, which we believe that are going to generate as much revenue as we possibly can. Almost immediately, we will be taking away money that was supposed to go to law enforcement or conservation in Park A to be able to now go into social services. So ordinarily, in as much as we would need to generate money in terms of park entry fees, generate money in terms of visitor, visitor arrivals in national parks, over and above the taxes that were going to be paid for corporate income tax and many others, we are also ensuring that as a ministry, we are freeing up resources which ordinarily would have been spent by Treasury, but by getting on board our cooperating partners who are able to put in that particular money that ordinarily should have been gotten from Treasury. So ordinarily, what you will see now within the Ministry of Tourism is that some of the activities that we'll be running with are going to be off balance sheet. And also, in terms of us contributing, the revenue aspect of tourism is what ambitiously call in my ministry to say the tourism sector by 2026 should be $1 billion sector. Now, when we talk about $1 billion sector, it's a lot of money. So what ingredients are we talking about to ensure that we have the $1 billion in the bank by end of 2026? One, investment. The investment that we're talking about in terms of hotels, guest houses, lodges, restaurants, adrenaline activities, those are the investments that we're looking at. Based on those investments, if we are going to talk about arrivals of about 2.4, 2.5 million in any particular country, and the spend is on average $500, clearly there's amount of employment that you need to generate. Also, there's amount of indirect opportunities that you can create. Indirect opportunities, John, here we're talking about suppliers to these restaurants, to these lodges, to these guest houses, to these hotels, taxi drivers, the markets themselves. So the good thing about this particular sector is that it caters for every facet of society.
And this is your objective for 2026?
And that is our objective for 2026.
Do you think this is something that you can achieve to transform this into $1 billion sector within a year?
I believe so. And I think it just requires a lot of concerted efforts. You see, the one thing that we've actually seen along the way in Zambia, obviously, is taking bold steps. Sometimes we're always shy to do what is right. Sometimes we don't trust ourselves to say, look, we can actually achieve $1 billion. And I'll tell you one thing. 2023, we exited arrivals at 1.4 million. In 2025, 2.2. Now, that is a big jump. Did we ever imagine that we'd do that? No, but we took bold steps. What bold steps did we take? We said, okay, fine. This visas issue is just an inhibiting factor for tourists to come through. Can you scrap those visas? We did that. Can we spend more money in marketing? What did you need to do? Create top-of-mind awareness. People needed to know what Zambia is all about. It's actually shocking, Jonah, to let you know that sometimes when you go out there and you talk about Zambia, you'd actually be surprised that some people don't know. But I'm always very mischievous when I tell them, I say, you know, I know more about your country than you know about my country. It doesn't matter where I go. I'm fortunate enough to travel a bit. But what is important was that we had to spend money in marketing. We had to spend money with respect to, or rather lose money momentarily with respect to visa fees. We also just needed to make sure that we start inviting private sector to invest in the business. So if ordinarily from 2021 we were only sitting at about 500,000 arrivals, and then suddenly you have 2.2, clearly in a particular year, clearly those people need to stay in some place. And I want to also indicate to you that if you look at the tourist arrivals, 60 to 70% of those arrive in Livingstone. At any given time in Livingstone, if there's just one quote-unquote big event, there's nowhere to sleep. What does that mean? It's a good problem to have, and it requires you, now the private sector, to invest in the business.
But when you look at these numbers, Minister, you are saying there's 2.2 million people that have come into the country. Mm-hmm. You are targeting 2.5 million?
2.5, end of this year.
Are you saying that you've contributed anything close to $1 billion with these 2.2 million visitors?
Well, when we talk about close to $1 billion, right now, as we speak, we're probably talking about $880 million contribution towards 2025. By 2026, we're talking about easily becoming $1 billion business.
Let us talk about the investment opportunities. The finance minister in his address to parliament said the country had attracted significant amount of investment, and he spoke about mining, agriculture, tourism, and energy, as well as manufacturing. Let's zero in on tourism. What are some of the major investments that you've seen in the year 2025?
In the year 2025. So I will tell you, what we've actually done in the year 2025 was, first of all, end of 2024 rather, we decided to come up with what we call an investment guide into tourism. Now, this was a project that was financed and spearheaded by UN Tourism, which we're very, very delighted about. Now, that particular document is a guide. I probably want to call it an investment dummy for people who want to invest in the tourism sector. Now, all it did was to spell out investment opportunities, the sites that exist in the tourism sector, number one. Number two, we're talking about the steps that any investor needs to take to be able to invest in the country. And what we realized very quickly, Jonah, was that for a very long time, investors could not know where to knock doors in terms of tourism. So it is an issue, and I will tell you now, many of these investors who come into the country today in the tourism sector would rather invest in national parks or World Heritage sites. And you know how sensitive these particular areas are. And we need to make it much, much easier for them to actually understand that they can actually invest in these particular areas. And that's how we came up with this particular guide, which is a living document where any investor, such as yourself, will be able to come and say, okay, fine, I want to invest in the sector in tourism today. Then you look at the document, then you say, okay, fine, this is the site that I want. We'll give you coordinates, we'll tell you the reserve price for that particular investment, and then we start doing the paperwork. So for 2025, in terms of the pledges that we have, I'll probably miss the number in terms of the pledges that we've gotten. But one thing I would mention to you is that we've gotten interest in big hotel chains, big camps. We've gotten Ken and Donny, who are sitting in the camp. They were big in Botswana. We have the Four Seasons Group. We have Club Med. We have all these big chain hotels which are knocking on our doors. Melia hotels, all looking at opportunities to invest. And also aspects of creating convention centers. The Minister of Tourism today has actually earmarked two sites, two cities per se, Lusaka and that of Livingstone. Now, these are cities where we want to create more investment in terms of conferencing, because we realize that the MICE business is what really draws a lot of attention. When you get business tourism coming to your country, eventually it spirals into leisure tourism, because I would have come into the country and I've seen exactly how beautiful the country is. The next time I come back here, I'll be coming back with my family. So you've seen that with the opening of the Kenneth Kaunda wing of Mulungushi, we are almost immediately closing on a deal of having an adjacent hotel there. Now that again is complementary to the convention center. We're talking about Livingstone here. We're talking about a minimum of a 3,000 seat capacity convention center. It's coming. Everybody else, it's all about the process that is going on in the background. And before you know it, we'll be able to now go up to the public and then announce to say this is the kind of investment that we're going to have in the country.
When you talk about marketing, you say you've spent quite a bit on marketing, but it's also true, Minister, that if you walk up to the ordinary Zambian and ask them what the agenda is with selling Zambia outside the country, they probably wouldn't be able to share it as easy as they would say visit Rwanda, for example. How is this narrative being changed, and how much investment are we actually putting for us to be known by the world? And what exactly are we telling the world, Minister? What are we telling the world?
Well, I think our tagline is Destination Zambia. That's not, you need to know that. It's Destination Zambia. So when we're talking about Destination Zambia, what is behind Destination Zambia? That's number one, top of mind awareness. We call it TOMA. It's very, very important. So when you go out there, so in 2024, when we did a campaign of having to understand Zambia, we hit close to 1.5 billion, what you call them, views about what Zambia is all about, which was a good thing, as opposed to the hundreds of thousands that we had before. Now, that in itself was a start. Yes, we can do more. So we're talking about top of mind awareness. Then the next thing that obviously needs to happen in terms of Destination Zambia is issues of visas, which obviously you and I ably talked about. Visas was, to a large extent, people think that visas is not an issue. But you cannot stay in limbo. If you're going to plan for a holiday and then you're applying for a visa from your country of origin, you can't just stay in limbo, because you won't even know if at all your visa will be accepted or rejected. So you must just be able to look for a destination that will allow you to be able to get your visa upon arrival. Then the third aspect is airlift, Access Zambia, which is behind the Destination Zambia campaign. Access Zambia now will allow us to get as many flights as we possibly can in country. That has been a big problem. Many years ago, probably during your time, I don't know if you were born by then, but we used to have direct flights out of Delhi, London, Washington, D.C., Frankfurt, wherever. Those things used to happen, direct flight out of Lusaka. But those things faded away, reasons best known to ourselves as a country. But now we're about to revitalize that. Now, it can only take a bit of time to actually encourage an airline to fly into your country. So now those are the campaigns. So behind Destination Zambia, we've got a team working on Access Zambia. We've got a team working on visas to increase. When we got into office, we only had 53 countries which did not require visas. Fast forward today, we have 167. So we've got a team still working on that. We want to have as much. And also to just indicate to you that we want to encourage intra-Africa travel. So the 167, unfortunately, it's sad to say that we don't have as much African countries that don't require visas to access our country and vice versa. So that is one of a lot of work that we need to work on. And then also the top of mind awareness. Now, this is the reason why we've actually gotten into deliberate campaigns with the likes of Expedia, with the likes of the BBC, to ensure that people actually get to know the Destination Zambia. So Destination Zambia is the campaign. What do we want people to know? We want people to know, to say, look, you can come to visit Zambia. Zambia is the first safe destination. Peace, security, stability. The three things that we always get to say. The three ingredients of a particular area. Adventure, opportunities for you to invest. No better time to invest in Zambia than now. And obviously, what is more critical as we get to sell the destination itself is the Zambians themselves. I think it's very, very important for the Zambians to sell Zambia. There's no better person to sell Zambia than the Zambians themselves. And for us as Zambians, we want to speak to the media. We want to speak to our influencers. We want to speak to our change makers. Those are the people who can actually sell the destination. So when I sit here and then I'm asked to say, Minister, are you doing enough? I think we can do more. but we're doing only so much to get to where we are. Now, you should also bear in mind, Jonah, that in as much as we want to spend, I always hear people talking about, oh, no, visit Rwanda, why don't you do this thing? It costs money. The resource envelope that we have as a country today to market our destination might not be as much as our colleagues next door. Now, but we have to be very careful in how you get to do some of these things. If you're going to do comparatively to say, okay, fine, this is how much they spent. They probably spent $1.6 million for the season. Now, with the challenges that our country is faced with, we've got a power deficit. We still need to feed our people. How then would I be able to justify to spend $1.6 million for a season, as an example, when in actual sense I needed to feed people on cash for work or enhanced social cash transfer? So we have to choose as a country. There's certain sectors that can be self-sustaining. So for us, we should be able to use our own expertise as opposed to having to jump the gun, if I can put it that way. But also, when the fiscus, when the treasury is healthy enough for us to be as lavish enough to spend $1.6 million in a season, I suppose we could possibly do that. But then again, you have to be very, very smart to be able to say, okay, fine, what is it that you can do? We don't want to get a social media backlash. I'm not going to name a country, but there's an advert somewhere in Southern Africa here where a named socialite, a named comedian did a fantastic video. I loved it. But I tell you what, my counterpart in that particular country was under pressure because the general members of the public wanted to know why the country or the sector was spending X amount of money as opposed to taking that money elsewhere. So there has to be a balancing act ultimately. But then again, there's social media. Sometimes I sift through social media where people say, no, you're not doing enough. And they're like, maybe we're not doing enough. We can do more. But I think it's always important rather than sitting on the rollers and not telling us exactly what we need to do. If it's going to cost us a lot of money, maybe not. We'll put a few brakes on it. But if it's something that we just need to show up, I believe that my ministry, or indeed myself, will be able to show up and actually show that we are able to market the destination.
Minister, you've said something quite interesting as well, and you've spent a decent amount of time boasting about how Zambia has 167 countries that have to come without the requirement of a visa or a visa upon entry. But there is a counter argument to this, and this is a growing discussion on the African continent, the art of reciprocating, that Zambia is allowing 167 countries to come in visa-free or visa upon arrival, and yet Zambians can barely go anywhere with without a visa. How are we balancing this act? Is the benefit of tourism outweighing this argument by the citizens?
Well, I suppose the argument from the citizens is more than welcome, and it's justified. And I think for a very long time, I will speak as the chairperson for UN Tourism in Africa, the Commission for Africa now. The conversations that we've had with my colleagues in the 53 African countries affiliated to UN Tourism is to really understand how best we can deal with reciprocity with regards to visas. Now, it's not just around the visas, I must just indicate to you. It also goes into the fifth freedom, air access. We found ourselves in a very awkward position as Africa, and when I call it an awkward position, I say, look, we've got the African Union, and the mandate that the African Union has is obviously at the backdrop of the Africa Free Continental Free Trade Agreement. It also speaks about free movement of goods and services, trade in services, and as such, the moment we're going to create what we'd like to call, or what my president Hakainde Hichilema will always call, the non-stop border, it should also reflect to us the movement of individuals, goods, services, trading services as well. So there's no reason why if I'm going to travel to Nigeria, I will require a visa, and vice versa. Ghana, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt. I think it doesn't just all go well. And these are the discussions that us ministers of tourism in Africa have actually sat down with our colleague ministers of foreign affairs in our respective countries, our ministers of interior, who are obviously our home affairs, and as well as ministers of transport and logistics, to be able to understand some of the challenges that they may be faced with regarding to operationalizing free visas, especially in Africa. By now, it's 10 times, I will mention, it's 10 times more difficult to travel Africa than it is in Europe. But why is it so difficult when we have an African Union, just like they've got the European Union? So why can't we just replicate what is happening in Europe, in Africa? Today, if you're going to be asking Zambia Airways, our own flagship carrier, to fly directly into, I'll give an example, let's say Accra, Ghana, there will be issues of the fifth freedom. Okay, fine, we need an air access permit. And why should we do that? We're in Africa. Do you know what our ambition is as African ministers of tourism, especially in areas such as SADC? Why can't we have flights within SADC be regarded as domestic? And that in itself will create more value within this particular area, rather than just, it's an hour away. If I'm flying from Lusaka to Livingstone, it's 55 minutes. If I'm flying from Lusaka to Harare, it's about 60 minutes. Why should it be international? It was because across an international borderline. But those are things which, quote unquote, we say, borders were just imaginary lines, which were designed by somebody who was sitting in Berlin many, many years ago. But as SADC, we can agree to say, if I'm going to be flying within the SADC region, why shouldn't I regard it as a domestic flight? And why shouldn't I just allow any of these particular airlines to fly into my country? So that protectionism that exists is what is killing us as Africa. And as Zambia, we're prone to that, and we are working towards it as ministers of tourism to fight that particular issue.
Isn't the reasoning behind that kind of protectionism, as you put it, also there to protect the local industry? For example, we've got Zambia Airways, ProFlight, I don't know which others that are available, but you've got these airlines locally, and they probably wouldn't be able to compete favorably if it was as open as you are describing it, that Zambians can just quite easily get any of these flights to flight domestically on South African Airlines, for example.
But I think, look, if you look at what we've agreed on at AU level, when you signed up, we all ratified the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's very simple. It says, open up your borders. Whatever your, quote unquote, your core competences are, if I'm producing X and country B doesn't have X, open it up for me to take, and then I'll pick up whatever I need to pick up from your country. And that's the spirit in which we all ratified the AFCTA. But why is it that when it comes to certain goods or services, people go cold feet? And this is where us, as ministers of tourism, are finding it very difficult. And we've been talking to our ministers of commerce as well to say, look, if you're going to open up, it's not just goods, it's air, it's issues of visas. That in itself, you just need to be resilient as a country. And remember, Jonah, one thing you need to understand that you can never be a closed economy for a very long time. Somewhere, somehow, you're going to break.
On that specific one, perhaps it's also an issue of security, isn't it? National security.
Absolutely. It's an issue of national security, and that's the more reason why we're actually dealing with our Ministers of Interior, Minister of Home Affairs, to just let us know exactly what's obtaining in terms of security. Some countries obviously are used as routes for human trafficking and all these illegal activities that happen, wildlife trafficking and so forth. But ultimately, that's the more reason why we have these joint technical committees on defense and security within these particular regions, within East Africa, which obviously speak to issues such as peace and security that you're talking about. So we're not oblivious to what is going on in this particular instance. But the only thing that needs to happen is those of us who are in the trade aspect should be able to now relay to the defense and security cluster to say, this is what we are trying to achieve. Is this something that you can handle as a unit? And then if they're able to tell us that, then we implement. If they're seeing any red flags of some sort, they'll come back to us and tell us. But ultimately, peace, security, stability is one thing that we want to drive in Africa. President Hakainde Hichilema has been very categorical. And the only way that the AFCTA can actually thrive is if peace, security, and stability is actually actualized. And maybe that's the more reason why you find that other countries are a little bit cold feet in terms of opening up their borders because of the same. But then it's also important that we start to isolate those particular countries. Remember, instability anywhere is instability everywhere. So if we don't pay particular attention and help the neighbor to cease fire or to stop fighting, then I can gladly tell you that even the growth in your particular country will be non-existent.
The way we talk about all of this sounds very macro, Minister, that we're talking about these huge investments in hotels, these airlines, but there are also people that are a part of the tourism sector. that are at a much lower level. And I'm talking about people like, for example, the curio traders. And I believe you saw a story just recently that we covered where some curio traders were complaining about how business has been really tough for them. And some of them are falling out of business. Some of them are having to adjust the prices of their commodities. What are we doing for this specific bracket of people that are contributing to tourism of this country?
Well, I just want to also indicate to you that we, in everything that we do as a tourism sector, so we input whatever the output is input for the labor productivity report, which obviously is done by the Minister of Labor through ILO. And that in itself looks at the spectrum of everybody within the tourism sector. The tour operators themselves, the curio traders, the transport people, even the wait staff, the waiters, butlers, whoever it is within the spectrum of tourism. Now, I want to just indicate to you that, and specific to your question regarding to curio traders form a very, very integral part in the tourism sector, especially in Zambia. And the good thing about the curio traders is that the artifacts that they hand carve, are what we like to sell as indigenous artifacts, indigenous products. The challenge that we were faced with obviously was during the COVID pandemic period where they had nobody to buy their product. And I want to indicate that at the time that that thing was going on, I was in the private sector, and I was I formed part of a solution to how best we're going to deal with those colleagues of ours, which we saw a bit of some funds coming from CASA where they were assisted to just really make ends meet, at least food on the table, take the kids to school during that intervening period. But what we realized also is that their trade was not formalized to an extent where now, even when borders are shut, they would be able to now export that particular product. And I want to just make mention that over a period of time, we've been working on ways and means on how we could actually create a bigger export market for the curio traders. And how we create an export market for curio traders is, number one, to catalog their products. If you don't know what product you have, then it becomes difficult for you to sell. That's number one. Number two, permits. What do they call them? Is it phytosanitary permits? That is wood, whatever it is, it needed to be cleared. There's certain countries which will not allow you to export any form of wood or whatever it is for best reasons based on to themselves. So we need to make sure. Then also to ensure that there's an off-taker who will be able to distribute in any country that you want to. If it's Europe, it's the UK, US, wherever. So that is what we're working on. Now remember, those colleagues of ours also require a formalized trading market. And we've gotten on board the likes of the World Bank. We've gotten on board the likes of Cities for Growth, who are helping those curio traders to be able to now cluster their products so that they're able to go and export, as opposed to just you, individual Jonah, to say, okay, fine, look, I'm going to export to the US. But everybody needed to put one big container, you ship it out. But the other problem that we had, the big problem that came on board was that if I give you stock today, and then it's going to take probably about a month for you to pay, what happens to me within the month? So we created a problem where now people needed hand to mouth, or rather fast money, so that they're able to put food on their table. So that is something, again, that we're working on. So these particular colleagues of ours would require a little bit of patience so that we actually get to understand, so fine, maybe the scale of production that they need to increase, so that if they export X, they will remain with Y to be able to sell on a daily basis and be able to feed their people, their children, their families. But if they're going to get their entire stock and then export it and wait for 30 days for them to be paid, it might be a bit of a problem. So we've been in talks with them to see how best we could now increase on their production based on what they require, and then the rest obviously will be able to be exported.
You are talking about a $1 billion sector, and you're talking about how much it contributes to the economy. Government says that since 2022, over 9,800 micro, small and medium enterprises have been empowered. But most of these are not from the tourism sector. And yet you argue that it's contributing so much, to the economy. Where are we placing them in all of
No,
this?
I'm not sure when you say they're not in the tourism sector. If you heard me correctly earlier in our interview, I was talking about the indirect jobs that we created. So micro, small, medium enterprise, obviously, is purely based, the definition is probably the threshold of your turnover. I'll probably say 800,000 and below, whichever it is. If you're going to do TOT, that's where your threshold is. But if you're going to talk about who the SMEs contributing to the sector, I could safely tell you that the bulk of them, if you're going to talk about an SME producing chef's uniforms, they're probably supplying the tourism sector. If you're going to talk about an SME which is growing vegetables, they're probably contributing to the tourism sector. If you talk about an SME who's supplying alcohol, beverages, it's in the tourism sector. If you're going to talk about an SME producing wood, tables, it's probably into the tourism sector. So I mentioned earlier in the interview that everything that you do around this place is hospitality. If you walked into this building today, you are probably met by one of my staff there who probably greeted you and said, oh, hello, good afternoon. Oh, we're going to the minister's office. Yes, that's hospitality. That person, not only are they sitting in the Ministry of Tourism, but they're contributing to the hospitality sector. The SME sector in itself, those people are sitting in Soweto. Those are quote unquote their SMEs. But all that tomato, all those cabbages, all those, I will tell you that they not only go into your homes, they actually go into a lodge, a guest house, or a hotel, or indeed a restaurant. If you check around Lusaka, just Lusaka itself, I can tell you that in the year 2024, 2025, the number of restaurants that have mushroomed in this place, where do they get their products from? They don't grow themselves. They just sit and then cook. All that is the SME market that we're talking about.
Finally, Minister, as we wind up our interview, government says that for tourists, their stay has increased to about 5 days per visit from 3 pre-2024. Have you established why these tourists are staying longer?
More activities to do, more opportunities for investment. Now they've become this inquisitive tourists. Suddenly, they just used to come into the country. Okay, fine, you see the Victoria Falls, you see the wildlife, what else? They fall in love with this country. They fall in love with Zambia. And then they tell me and say, look, I want to invest. So when they want to invest, then they meet. Also, can I please meet the Minister of Tourism? That's an additional day. Okay, fine, fantastic. Can I just have another day? Maybe I could probably just start my application for business. That's another day. So there's more opportunities that are existing in this country today, as opposed to what used to happen where people just fly in and fly out. Now remember also, the 3-4 days that you're talking about, Zambia as a destination was an add-on. When I say an add-on, is somebody who comes from wherever in the world, they fly into Africa, they do whatever they need to do, and I'll be very clear. They fly into South Africa, they probably do the One Cape route, they do the Table Mountain, and then they're done. They said, look, we've got an additional 2 days. What else can we do? Oh, you can actually get onto a 1 hour, 20-minute flight to the Victoria Falls. Oh, fantastic. Then 1-2 days they're there. But this time around, the tourist says, we're traveling to Zambia, the destination. And that's why we're calling it Destination Zambia. And that's the reason why you're seeing. So we've eaten up the 2-3 days that they used to go to the Cape Farms, to Table Mountain, or to Kruger, wherever it is, but they're enjoying it in Zambia. They come to visit the Victoria Falls, they do whatever they need to do. The next 2 days, after 2 days, then they move into a different place, maybe Lower Zam, to go and see safari, and then they come into Lusaka for 1 day to see the nightlife, and then they fly out. That is exactly what is happening now, and that's how we've established it.
Minister, thank you so much for talking to us on this edition of This
And
Day.
thank you so much for having me. We're looking forward to having yet another edition of this interview, which will now be able to tell you to say, yes, we've actually hit the $1 billion.
All the best.
Thank you so much.